Welcome to another episode of Connect with KB. It's so great to have you tuning in as we talk about business, education, leadership, and all the wonderful things that connect us to each other. I am so excited today that I have a guest here who is part of a family who believes very strongly in public service. She has served as a state representative in the Michigan Legislature from 2011 to 2016, was a lieutenant governor candidate in the 2018 Michigan Gubernatorial election. She's been vice president of government relations for the Grand Rapids Association of Realtors, and she's now serving as the Kent County Clerk. She's a mom of four. She lives and breathes Lowell sports, and she's dedicating her career to promoting West Michigan. I want to welcome to the podcast my dear friend, Lisa Posthumus Lyon.
Well, good morning, KB. It's so nice to be back in Lansing and sitting here across from your face and getting all caught up here.
Well, you know, you and I have known each other for over 25 years, and I've had an opportunity to watch your career, and you know that I'm so proud of you and so admire the work that you do and your commitment to the state of Michigan. And one of the things that's been so neat about you is you're jumping in, and I'm going to ask you that when we get kind of start to end of the podcast and wrapping things up. But you have a lot of guts and a lot of grit, and it's one of the things I've always admired about you. You've been that way for 25 years. You were that way as a young adult, teenager, and you're still that way today. And so, you know, part of that is who Lisa Posthumus is. And so, Lisa Posthumus Lyon, tell me your story.
Well, I kind of an open book, so you pretty much covered so much of it, but I went to Lowell. I still live I would say I live in the same house that I grew up in, but in 2018, that house burnt to the ground. But we certainly rebuilt on that property, and that's where I continue to live. I call Elto my home, and I probably always will. Love Kent County, I love West Michigan, and I love Michigan. So I just have this tremendous call to serve. We grew up kind of with this, mantra that, faith, family, and, farming, and then politics. And so I really, take that to heart, and went to Lowell schools. My kids now go to Lowell schools. But that's where I met my husband. Brad and I will be celebrating 20 years this year. So that's really fun and hard and awesome all at the same time. And truly, marriage has kind of become my passion. It's not an easy thing to do, and that it's exactly it. Marriage is something that you do every single day. It's not something that just happens and it's all love and rainbows. And so I love to walk along with other couples and just kind of encourage them in their marriage. And again, it's that service thing also applies in marriage and parenthood and in politics and everything you do. That's kind of how we were ingrained. So Brad and I met in high school. I went to Michigan State, got my degree in agricultural, natural resources, communications. So I'm a farm girl first and foremost, despite any political pedigree. And I really thought I would be kind of an agricultural lobbyist or public policy advocate. And especially, I always was interested in serving in the legislature or in some elected office, wherever that calling was. But when I started having kids, I kind of backed off that. That train of thought for a while, and especially after having four and under, that was really where my time and focus was. But after watching so many people leave the state in 2009, that's kind of when I decided, all right, I've got to jump in. I want to be part of a solution. I want a Michigan that my kids can grow up in, that I can stay in. And so that's kind of what drew me back to public service. And I'm so glad it did. And I'm really glad to have been a part of that Michigan comeback from the lost decade. And it's just an honor to be able to serve. And that's what I want to do. I want to put all of my skills and abilities to use for the people and just to serve others.
Well, you had an opportunity when you were in the legislature. You were chair of the education committee. I think you were also part of the elections committee or something like that.
Chaired that for 4 years.
Yeah, so it really kind of set you up on this path for a natural transition to become the Kent County Clerk.
It was a perfect segue.
And, really for you and your commitment to West Michigan and all of Michigan, really, talk a little bit about what that means. And there's been a lot of changes with the election process, the system itself, and I know you've done a lot of great work over in Kent County. So talk a little bit about your role and really what it's all about.
Sure. So having transitioned from the legislature where I was making the laws and saying and deciding how things should be into the role as county clerk and register of deeds, now my charge was to operate and administer and implement the laws. And so it was a very, very different role. But again, it's still serving the public, it's still serving the people. And I like to say in the clerk's office, I get to interact with Kent County residents at every major milestone in their life, the good, the bad, and the ugly, because we provide such a broad spectrum of services from birth certificates, death certificates, marriage licenses, notary publics, doing business registrations, elections, maintaining your property records, and then there's the courts where I have charge of maintaining all of our circuit court records, and there's some good, there's some bad, and there's some ugly there. So it's really a tremendous responsibility. I've got about 50 staff members that make up the Clerk and Register of Deeds office. So while elections is kind of the sexiest role we play and gets the most attention, it's really only one of 4 areas of service. We deal with the elections, the court, clerk of the circuit court, all of those vital records, and then property records in our Register of Deeds.
Well, it really is. It's a big job. And, even when you just break it down and we talk about elections, and, I wanted to ask you about the midterm because there were so many people post-pandemic that now are coming back and they're voting in person. And the statistics to me were really kind of, a little bit shocking that many people, when they have the ability to vote absentee, that they want to be there and be in person to do it. What is the reason for that? What do you hear?
Well, I think Michigan did the right thing by having no reason absentee voting. It's something I certainly pushed for when I was in the legislature, making sure that we could do that securely, provide that security and that convenience. And, for several cycles since 2012, we were incrementally seeing more and more people utilizing absentee voting. And then once 2018 Proposal 3 hit and we implemented no reason absentee voting, that kind of started to skyrocket up even more. But we really didn't have, until this past midterm, there really wasn't a real baseline because we were dealing with pandemic. And then the introduction of no reason absentee voting. And so we went from, in the 20s, pre-Proposal 3, no reason absentee voting to, up into the 30s and what have you. But then the pandemic hit and you're seeing, 50%. We got up to 78% of our voters in Kent County in one election voted absentee. And then, of course, we had the May election in 2020 where 100% was absentee by virtue of that's how we operated in the real thick of the pandemic. And so you're kind of starting to see as we exit out of COVID that absentee to in-person ratio really starting to kind of balance out. I'm not sure that what we'll see. It just depends on which election cycle we have. We generally have more absentee voting in our smaller elections, more absentee voting. Actually, this cycle in 2020, we had more absentee voters in August than we did in November. We were 50-50. And that's kind of right around the baseline that I thought we would see. And that was in August. But then here we were in November, we saw 60% versus 40%, 60% in person. And I just think there's something really special about going to your polling location, filling in that bubble, putting that ballot through the machine and watching that number tick up. It's just, there's some psychological thing that you see when you cast that ballot, that your vote counted. And so I just think I know there are a lot of people who advocate for all mail elections, and I just think I think that denigrates some of that sacred component of democratic elections here in Michigan and in America. So I always vote in person. I bring my donuts to my workers, and I had my son. He, for the first time, he couldn't vote this cycle, but he was working elections.
Good.
And so working, you get to know your neighbors. It's really special, and I think a lot of voters still appreciate that.
Well, I heard that a lot. I mean, people are just adamant about that. Oh, no, I have to go. I have to be there. And, I think that giving people options and the ability to do however it best fits them. I mean, we have inclement weather here in Michigan, so you never know what it's going to be like on Election Day.
Right.
And that can have a big impact, as you and I both know. So
right. What will be interesting to see is how now we had Proposal 2 pass, and I could talk a long time and editorialize on that proposal, but it is the law of the land now, so we're going to be dealing with 9 days of early voting,
right? And
that would be in person. So it will be really interesting to see how early voting impacts absentee rates. Does that do those who are voting early, are those generally absentee voters that want to just get it out of the way but want to go in person but can't on Election Day, or are they going to be Election Day voters? So that'll be a very interesting dynamic to see who votes in what manner.
Well, and it'll be neat to kind of keep those statistics too, so that you kind of break it down and you start to understand, very much like what you're sharing with me right now. Not only that, these options in voting, but technology has changed so much. And do you hear a lot about, and I know that this, you have been so strong and out front about the security and integrity of elections. And do you hear that from people that's one of the reasons that they're showing up? I mean, are they just a little concerned about how things are run, or what do you hear about the technology?
Well, I think what's important for people to know is how, particularly with our election equipment, because that has replaced hand counting, and way back when, which is by nature, because humans are imperfect, much less accurate than the election equipment, than the voting machines that we use, and so that technology has made for swifter election results, more accurate election results, and that is really critical. And so what's important, again, with this technology is to make sure we have security parameters in place, to make sure it's functioning properly, to make sure that there isn't really ways to be able to manipulate this system. And so that's why it's so important with the checks and balances that we have in Michigan, from testing the equipment, and it's all public. Transparency is key in all of this. So the public testing of every piece of equipment that we have to make sure that the machines are accurate, that they're zeroed out, that everything is operating with the best of integrity going into Election Day. And then after the election, there's the verification process, kind of that final check and the backstop with the canvas, where our bipartisan folks take the technological advances that we've had that print these reports on tapes, and they go through it and they check. They check that with the poll book that isn't even connected to the machines, and our technology is not connected to the internet, and that's really, really important, because when you've got a decentralized state like Michigan, you don't have one big state election. You don't even have 83 big county elections. You have, precinct by precinct, multiple elections, and that's really hard for, a Russia to hack into.
You bet. Well, one of the things I thought was really neat about, you said you were hoping to have all of your results in within 24 hours. And I think you beat that time frame, didn't you?
By 2 hours.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep, we beat it by 2 hours. And technology has been a big part of that, because what we were using until this past cycle, we were using secure wireless modems to transmit those results. So essentially, particularly in the polls in our precincts, when I got results in the county, the public got results immediately. It was that, and it was real time as the results were coming in. The modems have no longer, they've kind of outlived their certification, so we don't use them. We didn't use them in 2020. But even so, even if there was the issue with the modem, that's again why it's so important to check the tapes that are printed out in the precinct to make sure what was reported to the county matches what really took place in the county. And so there's just a lot of checks and balances to this technology to help this instant gratification society get their results faster.
Well, and the transparency that you have with the website and the interactive map and the real-time results for people to be able to see that. And I think it gives people great comfort about the system itself,
right.
That, that things are by nature, you're absolutely right that you're hoping that there isn't a problem or a glitch within the system, but the human component to me would be so much more of a gamble in regards to getting it right. I want to ask you about education. I suspect that you guys spend a lot of time talking to people out in the community and talking about the election process and maybe especially to young people too about getting in and exercising their rights.
Yeah, this is so important. I've always viewed my role as a clerk, not as an activist, but as an administrator. There was so much upheaval in 2020 that I've really used that as an opportunity to embrace a new role as ambassador for elections. And so I've taken my job. One of the hallmarks of my job is not just administering elections, but educating the public about elections, how they work, not just how you can get registered to vote and the ways you can vote, but really what is the process? And so because the public deserves to have confidence in their election. And I think the way they have confidence is to understand the process. And so we've been making a concentrated effort to go out to our community organizations, to the public, to be able to really do kind of elections 101, from the pre-election to election day to the post-election, and really tell the public how their elections work. And that's what's so important. So that's what we do. In 2020, we were able to utilize COVID funds to have kind of an education campaign where we were able to utilize radio, social media, to really kind of get the word out, particularly about, at that time, the safety of casting your ballot despite the pandemic, because the last thing you want is people to be afraid to vote. So we were able to do that and kind of utilize that campaign as an effort to educate the public about absentee opportunities, in-person opportunities, where they can turn in their ballots, when they have to turn in their ballots. I'm hoping, that was a special time where we had special funding. I'm hoping to be able to start advocating for a little more funding from the general, my general budget, to be able to continue those kind of campaigns. Resources are tight. Everybody is fighting for funds, but the bottom line is this is a really important component of our country and our people-run government, and to be able to make sure that they know how to vote and how the elections work, I think that's a good priority.
I love your passion. I love your passion for what you do. It doesn't matter what you're doing. You're passionate about it. I mean, even back, when you were younger, and FFA and all the things that you've ever been involved in. And I want to kind of switch gears here a little bit, because I would be remiss if I didn't talk about your dad, Dick Posthumus, who I had the privilege to work for on a couple of different occasions. And the neat thing about being on the Posthumus team is once you're on for life. And, our friends still, all these 25, 30 years later, we are all still Team Posthumus in so many ways. And so I wanted to ask you about Dick and the influence that he's been on you.
Oh, gosh. Well, I don't even know where to start with Dad. I mean, he has been both he and my mom truly are the inspiration. They are the example by which I try to lead my life. That both of them exemplified servant leadership. And it wasn't about power, it was about service. And it wasn't about It wasn't about control. It was about leading and making everybody around them better. And I just think I think that's what I'm hoping to display for my kids, for the next generation, this servant leadership. But Dad's always been my counselor and my advisor, whether it was at home in the living room after basketball games, just kind of, walking through that, in FFA, encouragement and that kind of thing. But I tell you, there was something so incredibly special about the time I spent in the legislature, because this was not planned. This was not anything that either of us foresaw. But my time in the legislature, when I got elected, Dad was brought back kind of out of political retirement and into service in the Snyder administration, particularly working with the legislature. And I'm telling you, that was so special to work side by side with Dad, sometimes tell him no and not get in trouble for it. But it was really cool. He made the house feel like home. And now when things seem so, as a parent, to watch, as my kids grow up and I'm losing, more control on their day to day, just that advice, that counsel, he's just always had this knack to step back and to give you the big picture historically, especially right now when there's so much, it seems so chaotic and it seems so vicious and volatile and whatever. Dad has this historical perspective, not just from his time, but generations. And so he's just able to put things in perspective for me and for a lot of people. He's just a treasure trove of wisdom.
Well, he is. And you know what? He was and still is, such a great dad. I can remember years ago that, you're coming and you're running the legislature and there is a lot of things at stake. And he could get in the car and drive home to Alto and walk in the house and want to go to somebody's sporting events and never talk about a thing that happened during his day and how critical that was to the citizens of Michigan and really what was going to happen. And so I have always had such great admiration.
And that's one thing he did impress upon us. Go home.
Yep.
Go home.
Absolutely. And I see that you do the exact same thing. And you and I have talked about that in your role as a mom. I want to talk just real briefly about you. And I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, you can put yourself out there. And you are such a great role model for young women, not only your kids, but, for young women and young people in general, that you are one who says, you know what, I'm going to go try this, and you do it. Where did that come from?
Well, honestly, I don't know. I was super short, kind of the total runt of the litter. So maybe that's it. You've got to act big and be big if you're not big. Otherwise, you get, overlooked. But I certainly wasn't going to be overlooked. And I think part of it is you have to know who you are. And being able to step out and take none of these roles that I've played, while they're important, wife, mother, leader, legislator, clerk, while they're all so important, especially as a wife and a mom, none of them define me, right? And so I'm defined by my faith. And because I know who I am, it's so freeing to step out, take risks, and do what you think is right and where you're being led to, because failure is not a defining
failure. Is growth. It's growth. It's
absolutely.
Growth. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And the thing is, as I look at you, your path, what do you think the next 5 years looks like for you?
Well, there's a lot of important work to do in Kent County, especially growing public trust in our elections and giving people, I want to be someone that the public trusts, that they believe has integrity for them to entrust their elections to. So there's a lot of work I want to do in Kent County to make our elections better, to modernize our office there. And this is all professionally, of course. And I'm certainly hoping that the voters will send me back in 2024 to continue that job. Other than that, I just want to be prepared to step in when called and to step up when called in whatever role that would be in public service and leadership. I'm just going to do the best I can where I'm at to be prepared for the next step, whatever that is.
Well, and the beauty of life is that sometimes you don't know what that's going to be.
No.
And to be open-minded to that and the journey along the way. Give me one of the greatest lessons you have learned along this journey.
One of the greatest lessons I've learned on this journey is to just trust God. You know, I'm not responsible for the outcome. I'm responsible for putting everything I have into what I'm doing. I'm responsible for being the best mom I know how to be. I'm responsible for loving my husband the best I can, the most I can. I'm responsible for doing my job in a way that is trustworthy and honest and doesn't leave anything on the table and surrender that outcome.
You are exactly right. And you know what? I just have to tell you, in the state of Michigan, we have a lot of cloudy days, a lot of days that look gray. But Lisa Posthumus Lyon, you are sunshine. Oh. And you spread that all over and everything that you touch. So I want you to know how much I appreciate you coming on with me today. And I am always rooting for you. I want you to know that.
Well, you radiate yourself, KB.
Thank you so much. My guest today, Lisa Posthumus Lyon, the clerk for Kent County. I also want to thank my supporting sponsors, Downing Industries, Governmental Consultant Services, AF Group, Public Affairs Associates, and Mercantile Bank. You can check out all of my podcasts at connectwithkb.com. Until we connect again, go live your best life. I'm your host, Kristen Belter.